Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is David Carter. David is a Senior Manager of Cyber Risk Operational Assurance at Delta Dental. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Thanks for being here, David. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I've been working in cybersecurity since about 2005. So I'm coming up on my sort of 18-year mark in the industry. I actually started in consulting. So my first real role in cybersecurity was with PricewaterhouseCoopers, so one of the big four. And then I did that for a couple of years, and then decided I wanted to move out of consulting and into industry. I wanted to build things and sort of see them through their full life cycle, as opposed to just kind of launching them and then walking away. So that's where I've kind of stayed ever since after making that move. But what I think is kind of most interesting to me about my career so far is what happened to me around the halfway mark. So in the first half of my career, I was pretty much focused on technology in general, technology and cybersecurity. And that was my primary interest. But then I had the opportunity, the privilege to work in an organization with some of the most incredible leaders I've ever met. They really changed my opinion on what leaders could be. So it kind of opened my eyes and gave me, I guess, a newfound sense of purpose. Not like a complete paradigm shift necessarily, but rather I think a much better and deeper understanding of sort of what I wanted to do. So ever since then, I've been committed to building people, teams, and culture within cybersecurity teams. And I've been fortunate to be able to build services, processes, and even novel technology solutions. I've actually talked about this at a couple of conferences I've been to. I've been to the Rocky Mountain Security Conference up in Colorado. I've also spoken at RSA a few times at this point. Last time was in San Francisco in 2022. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Currently I work for Delta Dental of California. And I've managed a team there of some incredible people, working with some equally incredible people. And right now, my focus is on what I think most would describe as GRC, governance, risk, and compliance / internal assurance, as well as, surprisingly perhaps, technology continuity exercises, which is sort of the aspect of disaster recovery that focuses just on the exercise itself. So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thanks for the background. How long ago did you transfer from consulting to industry?
So I was only with PricewaterhouseCoopers for about 4.5 years. Sometime around, I think it was 2009, I left consulting. I did a little bit after that, but it was with a good friend of mine. We started a boutique consulting firm just to give it a shot. Ended up realizing, no, I really do like corporate more. Consulting is fun, but I like to sort of see things grow and develop and then refine them, get them really operationally excellent.
Yeah, that's a really common sentiment that I hear from folks that have been working for consulting firms. They usually want to go to industry for one of two reasons. It's either the work-life balance piece, especially back when travel was so ubiquitous, or it is the fact that they want to build something, feel like they're having more of an impact versus just assessing something and moving on to the next thing, or implementing something, then moving on to the next thing. So I've certainly heard that quite a bit. So that makes sense. What are your thoughts on the talent gap, as the name of the show says? Do you think that it's a real thing, or, is it real? If not, if so, what does it look like?
Yeah, I think there is. There's a couple of problems around talent, I think, at the moment. I think a talent gap is a good phrase to describe it, but I think it's important to kind of talk about where that gap is. I don't necessarily think that gap or that pain exists on necessarily the entry level. I think there are a lot of folks, especially in recent years, as boot camps and educational programs have come into being. There's a lot of folks that are ready to get into cyber and eager get into cyber. I actually mentor 2 different college courses for folks that are looking to make that transition. And it's absolutely important, sure. I think there's a lot more struggle and challenge with more of the senior folks. Because everybody wants a senior. that's been kind of what I've observed. That's what I've heard when I've talked to other folks, other mentors that I mentor with. Actually mentor with quite a few folks in those college courses, and that seemed to be sort of the consensus for the folks that I've talked to. Is it's really hard to find, in particular, senior staff, but then it's also really hard to find really excellent managers or people leaders in cybersecurity. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think part of it has to do with the fact that, again, like I mentioned, everyone wants a senior. But I also think that oftentimes we are technologists first, and we don't always think about, or perhaps even neglect, the people aspect or the people element when it comes to coordinating and leading teams. But that's kind of my personal axe to grind, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think the gap, or whatever you want to call it, is certainly different depending on the subdiscipline of security too. Like right now, the market's really, really, really soft from what I'm seeing for the GRC subdiscipline of security. There's a lot more people looking because the big four did layoffs and things like that, some of the smaller consulting firms. And that's kind of flooded the market with folks that a year and a half ago, you wouldn't be able to hire enough of if you tried. So it's weird how it ebbs and flows like that. Are there certain skill sets in your mind that we're really sorely lacking as an industry right now?
Yes. And there's actually 2 things that you kind of touched on that I wanted to address. The first is the softness in demand, which I find is actually really, really interesting. But then there's also, as you mentioned, like there's a skill issue, I think. The demand is interesting because at the end of last year in November, New York Department of Financial Services released a second amendment to regulations that they have. And a lot of companies will find themselves in the position where they have to attest to compliance with New York. And they're very stringent. They're very prescriptive requirements. These are not open to a enormous amount of interpretation. And I think for a lot of organizations, there might be some changes that they need to make without GRC folks navigating the labyrinth of what is expected and how are you particularly implementing it, and is that good enough? That's really challenging. I see that increasing, not decreasing. And so I think while there's a supply side, perhaps an oversupply of labor in the GRC space, the demand continues to incrementally tick up year after year after year. So it's interesting. It's a really interesting place. As far as skills go, when I came from consulting, it was a very particular kind of environment. And it was an environment where you really had to self-manage yourself. That was absolutely critical. You could not be successful in consulting if you weren't able to self-manage. And I think I took that for granted for quite a while. And what I see sometimes with folks is that they don't necessarily have the ability to totally self-manage. They're looking for a lot of direction, a lot of guidance, almost wanting to be micromanaged in some cases. And I'm trying to still figure out how to solve for that. How do you encourage people to self-manage? Steve Jobs talked about this. By the way, there's a very famous video about how the best top performers, individual contributors, top performers, they're self-managing, able to exercise autonomy, critical thinking, to understand not just what they need to do, but why they need to do it, so that as circumstances change, they're able to quickly adapt without having to check in with their manager. I don't necessarily have the perfect answer on how to get folks to have those skills. It's something I'm working on myself. How do I continue to encourage my team to pursue autonomy? How do I delegate my authority, not just my tasks? How do I get them to accept the authority that's been delegated to them? This is something I think about a lot. Like I said, I don't have all the answers, but it's something I'm working on.
Sure. I mean, do you think that self-management piece can be trained or engendered, or do you think it has to be kind of an innate personality trait of the individual?
So that's a really good question. What skills, or maybe abilities, if you prefer to think of them that way, are innate versus trainable? My opinion is that the soft skills, they're very hard to train for. Not impossible, but difficult. And especially difficult if the person doesn't have the right mindset. People that are curious, really, really curious, that often take ownership, that don't focus on external circumstances when things go wrong, but rather internal abilities, right? What can I do about that thing? I think culture comes into it. It's not just training. You need to have the right environment that values those things, right? So values autonomy, values people using their line manager's authority, values curiosity, values critical thinking. These things help too. But again, I don't have like the perfect recipe for this. I think it really is situational and somewhat contextual to the environment. But I think that there are some clear values that managers can say, look, I really value this. This is the kind of behavior I would like to see from you. Delta is, do a little bit of a pitch here, but Delta is really cool in that when I came there, one of the big things on my mind was culture. And about a year after I joined, I've been there for just over 5 years now, a year after I joined, they came up with this list of behaviors and competencies, which decomposed cultural elements into very discrete items. And so I can have very clear conversations with folks about, look, this is the kind of behavior that I'm expecting. I don't always see you demonstrating this behavior. How do you work on demonstrating that a little bit more? Or this is a competency, which is a little bit higher level than a behavior. Where do you see the opportunities to maybe demonstrate this behavior more? And get them to kind of think about that and start to internalize that and hopefully begin to demonstrate that.
Yeah, the way you describe it, kind of the way I'm picturing it, is that somebody has like a baseline level of ability to do something, and then they can grow beyond that baseline. But if they're coming into something with too low of a baseline, they're never going to get where you need them to be. It's kind of like you would need to have a certain baseline level of intelligence to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And if you're below that baseline, you may train forever and you may never get to the point where you can be an effective doctor or lawyer. Same thing, I think, with security and self-autonomy. These things, you have to have a certain baseline level, and you may be able to increase it a certain amount. But ultimately, I think everybody's going to have a floor and everybody's going to have a ceiling. And it's just a matter of finding the people that have a sufficient floor, to get them into those roles where you can help them explore their ceiling. I guess that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, and I would agree. Generally speaking, I would agree. It's really important to kind of know what are your strengths, because you always want to exploit your strengths, not your liabilities. And then so too, your liabilities, right? You want to sort of not put yourself in a position where your measure of success is most of the time focused on your ability to operate with your liabilities, right? Like, so for example, if I'm not very good at, I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical here just for sake of making the example. If I'm not very good at red teaming, right? I'm not a very good hacker. I just can't connect the dots. I don't necessarily want to apply for a red teaming role, right? I'd want to apply for some other role. Maybe that's incident response, right? Where I'm defending instead of attacking. I'm investigating instead of exploiting. It's good to keep those things in mind, because, folks should really try to, they're going to find their best success in exploiting their strengths, the things that they're good at. And furthermore, the things that they're good at and the things that they enjoy, if you can find a role that aligns with those two elements, you're going to be fairly successful. Now, you mentioned a ceiling, which is very interesting. This is commonly referred to as the Peter Principle. No offense. Are you familiar with it?
I am not.
Okay, so the Peter Principle, it's just a name for an idea. And the idea is that everyone is promoted until they become incompetent. And then they're not promoted anymore. But the problem is we have a tendency to promote and promote and promote and reward people. But as they get promoted, their role changes. And the thing that they got promoted for, the thing that they were excellent at, the thing they were incredible at, right? That's no longer going to be a part of their new role. A classic example, the switch between an individual contributor and a manager. There's a lot more than that, but we'll just stick with that because that's kind of an easy one. As an individual contributor, you are rewarded for all the things that you can personally do. As a manager, it's more about what you enable your team to do. And that gets into things like, what kind of environment are you creating for them? What kind of coaching are you giving them? What kind of mentoring are you giving them? How are you enabling them? How are you delegating, right? Because if you're not delegating clearly with clear expectations, there's going to be a lot of rework or delay or missed schedules. How are you communicating upwards? Because now you got to talk to a lot of other folks oftentimes. If you don't have good stakeholder management, argue that's part of individual contributors too, but it's especially important as you become a people leader. So there's this big shift, this big jump, right? And there's sometimes a tendency to reward individual contributors or top performers by making them managers. And then all of a sudden they struggle and they don't do well. So that's what you have to be careful of. And it's true it's not just individual contributor to manager, it's manager to director, it's director to VP. The same big jumps happen there. And so you have to bear in mind, like, where do what's your highest ceiling? And it can change, right? It's malleable, it's not fixed, but where's your highest ceiling? And how do you avoid going past your current ability? You always want to be pushing forward, of course, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're not going to be able to succeed. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you know what your ceiling is if you've never hit it before? And what do you do if you hit your ceiling or try to go past it and you're unable to hack it, basically? Then you have to adjust course. It's so funny you mentioned this idea of things changing from individual contributor to manager. I just talked to a guy yesterday, stellar pen tester, and he was promoted because he was a stellar pen tester up into a senior manager role for a consulting firm. Now he's a senior manager. He's managing a bunch of people. He's no longer hacking, which is what he really loves to do. And he's being brought into client meetings and expected to sell. And his day-to-day is so far removed from what he actually wants to do, and he didn't realize that was going to be the case until he got into that role. And now, he feels like he can't talk to the executive team and say, look, I'm unhappy. I'd like to go back to being a pen tester, but they don't have the, I guess, organizational support or trust or whatever it is that he feels comfortable bringing that to somebody to be able to move around. So now he's looking external to the organization to get back where he wants to be. How do we, I guess, as team leaders, as managers, as executives, as recruiters, help retain people like that they stretch too far and now they're looking to do something else? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, man. First of all, I really feel for him. That's a tough position to be in. And it's one that I think, it's not unique. It's not special. I think it happens. It happens to a lot of people. And it's difficult. I'll give you my thoughts. In order to retain people and have them feel safe, I think that you need to have a very strong culture, a growth culture. I'm gonna pontificate just a little bit because I feel strongly about this. My belief is that a high-performing team is a byproduct of a growth culture or a growth mindset, which is embraced by the team from the top to the bottom. It fundamentally is comprised of two elements. One is safety and connectedness, so that feeling of tribe. I wouldn't say family. I'm going to avoid that word. But a close-knit team, a close-knit group of people that are there to support each other. They're not there to attack each other or tear each other down. They're there to lift each other up and support each other. And that has to be coupled with an environment which is challenging. You need both. If you have both, you have a team which is always focused on growth. A byproduct of growth is performance. A comparison that I sometimes use, because it kind of helps people understand, it's a little bit more familiar, is students. So students in school. If you focus on the student and you say, I want you to be an A student, that's what I want you to focus on, is getting good grades. That's terrible. Because what maladaptive behavior are they going to adopt to do so? Instead, perhaps we would say, you know what? I want you to be the student that always turns their work in on time. I want you to be a student that always asks questions about something you might have gotten wrong and you didn't understand. If you do those things, the grade is a byproduct. And you're focusing on the right behaviors and practices, as opposed to being, sort of looking at the outcome or the objective blindly. So that's why I say high growth teams are high performing teams. I don't want to build a high performance team. I want to build a high growth team. I would say if that individual that you described was in a team culture that I'm advocating for, there's a potential that they might feel like they could have that conversation, right? And that they could say, look, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's incredible. I'm so, very privileged, and it's an honor. But I've realized, that the thing that I really want to do right now is do this individual contributor work. And if they felt safe, they could maybe have that conversation. But it's hard, right? I mean, it's easy to sit here and think about it and talk about it. It's a lot harder when you're that person that needs to have that conversation. But if you've got a manager that supports you, I think it's a lot easier. I'll give you an example. Everyone on my staff, I tell them, look, I always want you to do what's best for you. And I hope that's with me. But if it's not with me, I hope it's somewhere else in the cyber risk management organization, which is what we're a part of. And if it's not with them, I hope that it's with technology, in the larger technology organization at DDC. And if not technology, I hope somewhere else in DDC. Maybe I can't even imagine what it would be, but that there's somewhere else for you to be to reach your goals. And if not then, and truly you need to go outside of DDC, please let me know. I will help you. I will connect you. I will introduce you to people. I will point you in the right direction. My first interest is them. And by making that super duper crystal clear, my hope is that they will feel comfortable having conversations with me, like the kind of conversation that the gentleman you described wanted to have.
Yeah, and it's almost counterintuitive. I think a lot of people feel like if you give somebody the latitude to make that decision and to go be free elsewhere, that they're basically writing somebody a blank check, and then they're just going to go take that and go take the first job elsewhere. But in reality, that level of trust and understanding, that engenders loyalty. And I think that's something that's so lacking these days in the business world, both from the employer side as well as the employee side. People just aren't sticking around for 5+ years anymore. I mean, my dad spent 40 years with the same company, even through an acquisition, and was an engineer for them till he retired. Yeah. And that just doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So any thoughts on how we build teams that are more cohesive and longer lasting when the world around us is so tumultuous and everybody's switching jobs every year?
So you've heard the remark that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. I think the inverse might be true, right? People stay for good managers. And I think if we have good leaders and good managers, and we develop and we train those, and we've got leaders who are creating an environment and a culture that makes all of that possible, then I think we can do that. We can do what you're proposing, which is to do a lot better on retention and loyalty. The team that I have now is not the team I started with. So over 5+ years ago, every single person that I had then has left. I don't necessarily feel bad about that. I'll explain in just a moment. But the team I have now, I had an individual approach me last year, and they remarked about how they'd gotten job offers, and they were like, "I'm not interested. Like, I want to work for you." And I was like, "Thank you. That's incredible. Very flattering. I appreciate that. But you should always do what's best for you and your family, right? So thank you, but always do what's best for you and your family." The folks that left. So I had a number of folks that left. I had 2 of my staff become people managers. The one doubled their salary. I had other staff that left that didn't become people managers, but then went on to work for places like Amazon. I don't necessarily think that those are losses per se. Like, I would have loved to keep them, right? But they were truly doing what was best for them. It's my job to figure out, like, how can I support them the best, right? Like, so I'm trying to strike this balance about, what's best for the folks that work for me, but then also, what's best for DDC. And I hope I hope we can find it. I hope we can find that balance, but sometimes we can't. At that point, you hope that those people then become advocates, and maybe direct applicants your way, right? So like when you're hiring, when you're going out and posting, you're hoping that, former employees say, "Oh my gosh, check this posting out. Dave's an incredible manager, one of the best I've ever worked for. Please, please, please apply. This is a great opportunity." That's what I'm hoping for, right? Is to play that long game and that bigger picture game when it comes to acquiring and retaining talent.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, too, another part of the equation needs to be just planning for some attrition. I mean, like you said, at the end of the day, in an ideal world, people are doing what's best for themselves and for their family. And if it's doubling their salary or giving them the promotion that they were looking for, or, doing the type of work that they want to do, at the end of the day, you're best off just by wishing them luck versus trying to put either golden handcuffs on somebody or all these non-competes, all these different types of tricks that people use to try and retain people. But I don't think they engender a sense of loyalty. And those folks in those situations who are trying to be basically held hostage for a company, they're not likely to recommend that company to other people. And
Yes.
Referrals are so powerful.
Right. Yes. And that's the thing, right? You don't want to get a reputation as a toxic workplace, right? Or a toxic organization. And if you take that draconian sort of rule by fear and tolerate a lot of toxicity and you're trying to force people to stay as opposed to encourage them to stay, right? The industry is still small. I mean, it's incredible how small it is in some cases, but it gets around, right? Like people, I have multiple back channels for people that I've worked with in the past or run into at conferences or whatever. And, those back channels, that get information about what teams are doing what companies are doing what companies to watch out for. People talk, right? I mean, they share information. And so you hope that when you're not in the room and someone's talking about you or your company, your team, that the people that are discussing it are saying nice things, because that'll help you as opposed to unkind things, which could potentially be less advantageous.
For sure. Yeah. And unless somebody has been on the front lines of recruiting, or perhaps they've had some very difficult to fill roles sometimes, people don't realize how tough it can be to find certain skill sets. And if you have people just flocking to you because word on the street is you're amazing, even if that skill set is very tough to find, you've won in a big way. Have there been any, I guess, particular situations where you've struggled to hire somebody, or have you been pretty lucky up until this point?
It's always difficult. I don't know that I've ever had like an easy hire. When you post, there's so many applicants, and it's really difficult to to basically sort through all these different people that you don't know, right? You don't know anything about them other than what's words on a page. And figure out, like, is this the person that I think is going to be a fit for my team, for the role? Are they going to be successful? What are their long-term prospects? Trying to figure all that stuff out. It's really hard. It's difficult. You hope you get it right. Studies show that eventually we all get it wrong a couple times. But you hope that you're getting it right more than you're getting it wrong. And but it's challenging, especially now, right? So you post a role. I post all my roles. I have to, actually. But you post these roles, and you just get an enormous amount of applicants, and you're trying to do interviews. You're trying to go through the process, and you're hoping you're getting it right. But it is hard. There's a saying that I like that I've shared with some of the teams that I work with, which is it's not who you know, but it's who knows you. So sometimes people are like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, it's not entirely true, right? Just because you know somebody doesn't mean anything necessarily, but it's who knows you is really important. Applicants who I've personally been very appreciative for have made an effort to try to help me understand them, help me get to know them. So sometimes they'll reach out to me directly in messaging, right, on LinkedIn and stuff. And I've always appreciated it. It hasn't always translated to, necessarily a job offer, but, I've always been like, okay, I understand a little bit what you're about. Maybe I'll follow them. Maybe I'll encourage them, like, hey, this isn't a good fit for us, but I'm a fan. Like, I hope you do great things. I'm gonna follow you and sort of where I see an opportunity to champion, I will.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I do a lot of career guidance calls with people just to help them out in their job search. And one of the things that I hear pretty often is I'll give people that exact advice and say, look, you have this powerful tool in LinkedIn. You can find hiring managers for that job posting. Sometimes they're posting them directly. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of OSINT. You can figure out who that person is, but send them a message. You have 200 characters, I think, and a connection request. Explain why you're interested and why you think you're a good fit. And I'll often hear people say, well, that seems really aggressive, or, I just can't see that working. They're going to see that as too pushy. And I tell people, look, you have to realize your competition, everybody else is going out there and applying to that job. They may get 2,000 applicants to a single job. And if there's anybody that's going above and beyond and doing the one or two things that the rest of the applicants aren't, those are the people that are going to get the eyeballs. And ultimately, it's a tough market these days. There's a lot of competition.
Yeah. Pete, I am in violent agreement with everything you just said. Differentiation, I think, is sort of the key word there. But yeah, it's, how do I get to understand you a little bit better, and demonstration of going above and beyond, that shows initiative. I've never perceived any candidate for any role reaching out to me directly as being pushy or aggressive. Not at all. I hope folks understand that that's not the case.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your vote of confidence and agreement there. It's good validation that I've been giving some decent advice over the years. So
that's all we can hope for.
You mentioned kind of the volume of applicants that you'll get. Now, are you sorting through those applications yourself, or do you have the benefit of a recruiter to do that for you?
So both. So we do, it's, sometimes people are like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? Whenever I'm presented with an either or, I'm like, yeah, let's do both. So we do our own internal processes with our own internal DDC recruiters, but then we also have a number of external recruiters that, that we have relationships with that we work with as well. And I can't say that there's a consistent winner necessarily. It varies quite a bit. Sometimes we'll do, a direct hire from somebody who applied directly to our website. I've got staff like that. And then other times they'll come to us through an external agency or external recruiter. I've also got staff like that. it really just kind of depends on the candidate necessarily. It's what's interesting. I think the main difference between getting candidates from an external agency and just people that apply to postings online is the external agencies, the recruiters there, there's less volume. We have less candidates that come in through them. So by virtue of that, it's easier to get through those candidates, and they tend to be vetted quite a bit. So they're kind of like, naturally aligned, naturally strong. And so that makes it a little bit more, that sort of helps them step aside from the larger massive applications that come in through the website.
Yeah, and that's why I always tell people to leverage external recruiters, because we are specialists in our field, and we narrow down the thousands of people that the thousands of the giant pool of candidates that could possibly be a fit for your role. Reach out to the people that are the best fits and get them packaged up and presented and tied up in a bow for you. Whereas if you have sometimes your internal recruiters, they may not just be supporting your security group. They may also be supporting accounting, marketing, every other function within the organization. And it can be so difficult for them to develop a specialty in all of those separate functional areas.
Yeah, but there's actually a third sort of venue. And I think this one is really interesting, and I wish I could see it more. So we already talked about the external recruiter, and then the internal recruiters who take the postings, right? So the applicants to the post. But then you have internal candidates, people that are already in the organization. Maybe they're not in your department necessarily. Maybe they're in some other department. We've actually hired people for open roles that were internal candidates, not part of the cyber risk management organization, but they came to us through technology. That's really great too. And for folks that are thinking about transitioning from technology to cyber, I mean, look inside of your own companies too, right? Like, I always try to give consideration to internal candidates because they have institutional knowledge that any external candidate will not have, and that's a big advantage. Can't always do it, especially some roles. It's really, really difficult to try to make the argument there. But if people are struggling to get into cyber, look at the company you're with first. Like, don't rule them out necessarily. That's all I'd say.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we have a lot of people that don't come from a technology background to be able to either transition internally or to get into a security role from an unrelated, IT role, say help desk or something like that. As you'd mentioned at the beginning, we have a lot of people coming out of boot camps, degree programs. They got a couple certifications, maybe through their degree program or self-study. And there's just not enough jobs for these folks, in my experience. I kind of call it the talent bottleneck at the entry level. Any thoughts on how we can solve that and build a business case to onboard some of these folks?
Well, yeah. There's a couple of different aspects to what you just described. I think that I think there's a lot of challenges. So first off, cybersecurity or cyber risk management, however you want to label it, right? It is inherently difficult. It is inherently advanced. Your ability to be a very adept technologist who's able to teach themselves things, to understand highly technical concepts, that's really, really important. And you may not understand your ability to be successful in that environment if you haven't already kind of tackled that kind of work before. And technology is a great place to sort of get your feet wet and understand if it's for you or not. The boot camps and the educational programs are both good and at the same time, I think sometimes misleading. They're good because when I started in 2005, there was no such animal. Did not exist. There was no cybersecurity program. There was no cybersecurity degree. It didn't exist, not at all. I think for folks now, they'd have to have, if they're just getting out of school, right? The best candidates are going to come from strong technical backgrounds, either management information systems, management information science, MIS. They might be coming from computer science, engineering. They might be coming from advanced math degrees, data science, statistics. These are the folks that are going to be sort of geared for success by going through some of these advanced cyber security programs and then trying to get a job. If you're not coming from that place and you're just going into a boot camp, you're not going to be well prepared. You're going to know some stuff that you've been told, but you're not going to necessarily have the knowledge, skills, or abilities you need to be truly successful and competitive against other candidates. Trying to think about at the same time, I don't want to be accused of gatekeeping, but there are some realities I think that candidates need to face, and one is it's not an easy path. It's very, very challenging. It's very, very difficult. I'm in GRC, which most people don't think of as a technical aspect of cybersecurity. When I finished I'll talk briefly about my education. I spent 5 years in undergrad. I switched majors 3 times. I was one class away from computer science. I switched over to data telecommunication networking in the School of Informatics. That was my Bachelor of Science. My Master's of Science was human-computer interaction in the School of Informatics. My capstone was concerned with the construction of visual passwords. I wrote the software myself. I knew 8 languages at the time. And had a paper, did a presentation, had human subjects research testing. And I presented this all at the dean of the school. I co-authored a paper with a professor. That's where I was before I started cyber. And I felt like I was average. I got into cyber in consulting when I was beginning to think about what I wanted to do after my master's program. And a friend of mine said, well, you could do hacking. And I said, great, I don't know anything about that. And he goes, well, you know how to program, right? And I was like, yeah, of course I know how to program. Written lots of stuff. And he goes, give me 30 minutes and I'll teach you how this works. And he was right. In 30 minutes, I totally understood SQL injections because I've been writing SQL forever. And I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I get how it works and I understand the fundamentals and the mechanics of it. And then from there, you just build, right? I already had a great grasp of networking as a result of my studies. I had the engineering and the programming. I was well prepared to get into cybersecurity. Some of the folks that are getting in these days, they don't necessarily have that background. And I think as a result, 2 things happen. 1, it's hard for them to compete with other candidates who do. And 2, even if they do get in, they don't necessarily have a great foundation. They're trying to, in some cases, I think, rush into it a little bit, and then by not having the strong foundation, they struggle quite a bit. Maybe even leave cybersecurity.
So, on the business side, would you say that there's a business case to be made to hire the folks that aren't maybe as technical as they should be, or do we have to gatekeep some and take only the cream of the crop that have the technical foundations? Or is there a place for the other folks, like policy writing? Or I tend to be of the opinion that you can delegate some tasks to somebody at a truly entry-level capacity, but you have to have enough tasks to compile from your senior folks to create a role for that person. So that's kind of a best practice that I've heard of.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I advocate for having a strong foundation is that the biggest need and the biggest opportunity is for those heavier senior roles where you really need to understand the technical foundational topics. I think for entry level, certainly helps differentiate, compete, and stuff like that. But as a hiring manager, when I'm looking at, sort of lower level roles, I'm not even sure if I can say there's an entry level role, but like for the lower roles, right? The junior staff, it's tricky because you have to kind of balance things out. It's never clear. if folks have technical skills, that's absolutely fantastic. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can acquire technical skills. At a minimum, you have to do that. The second thing that I consider, which is really important, is the soft skills. Don't necessarily like the label, but I'll do my best to explain. I can't teach someone how to be a non-toxic person. And I can't allow toxicity and excessive negativity into my team. It's corrosive. It breaks down team cohesion, and it lowers overall team performance. And so certainly, technical skills are relatively easier to teach than soft skills. And so sometimes I'll make a trade-off and I'll say, you know what, maybe they haven't shown as much, but all the things that I value that are really difficult to teach somebody to do or to operate in a particular way, this person is already demonstrating and showing me that they can. So I'll say, you know what, maybe I'm going to make a bigger investment to get them up to speed technically. But that's because they've got all these other skills that I really value that are very difficult to train for or teach. And so that works out, right? So there's always a balance there. From a candidate perspective, you're always more competitive with technical skills, knowledge foundation. As a hiring manager, that's great. But I also need you to be a decent human being.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I almost see it kind of like a break even, where if somebody has a really good ability to learn, they're an information sponge, they're highly intelligent, they have good communication skills, they may start at a lower point, but at some point they're going to ramp up quicker, and then they're going to outpace that person who's already maybe more technical but doesn't learn as fast. The question is, how much runway do you have, and how much can you invest in that person, I guess? Yeah.
And I mean, what I'd love to be able to do, and it's very difficult to do for so many reasons, but is to develop talent pipelines. One of the things that working for a consulting firm taught me is that they have this very clear picture of what a talent pipeline is. It's coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship or championship. And they basically, the idea is that person they're going to pick people that they want to sort of root for, and they're going to try and push those people up through the career path, right? From junior to senior staff to manager to director, maybe to partner. So there's this very clear idea of a path, of a pipeline. My experience with corporate is that is sometimes a notion, but it's not very well defined. There's very little deliberate strategy around it. I think that's a missed opportunity because there are some people that, I think have tons of potential that you can construct something of a pipeline for, right? And basically get them to that highest level of operational capability that they might personally have. Maybe that's taking a person from a junior to a senior. Maybe that's taking a person from a junior to a senior to a manager. But I think internal candidates are fantastic, but we do very little to support them and very little to encourage them. And oftentimes they find that the market at large is more supportive.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people default to hiring outside the organization because they want to hire somebody with a specific set of skills to fill this one particular hole on their team. And in an ideal world, this person would have experience in all these different disciplines and tools, and throw it all into the same job description, and we'll go out and find that person. Well, half the time that person doesn't exist. And so you have to figure out how long it's going to take to train somebody with, say, 50% of the qualifications. And if that's less time than spending 6 months or a year trying to find this person out on the open market, you have to kind of do that math. And obviously sometimes it's going to be difficult to predict as well.
Well, and I have a theory on why this happens more often than not, right? So why do we hire external candidates versus why do we not build pipelines for internal talent development? And it comes down to another sort of mental model that I like. Are you familiar with the bike shedding effect or the bike shed effect?
No, lay it on me.
It's also called the law of triviality. And essentially, the law states that people will tend to gravitate towards simplicity and away from complexity. So the example that's often provided in explaining, how does this actually work in practice, is the construction of a nuclear power plant. So it's a very dramatic example. So in the example, there are a number of project managers who are dedicated to the construction of a nuclear power plant. Very complex to do, lots of details, requires tremendous amount of thought, concentration, focus. And what ends up happening is, in this theoretical story, right, is that the project managers end up spending most of their time not on the design of the core of the nuclear power plant or necessarily its safety systems, but instead on the bike shed, which they need to build so that people can ride their bikes to work. It's simple. We can make arguments about color. It doesn't require a lot of thought. And so the bike shed effect is this tendency for people to go to the simple solution. The simple solution in this context, our conversation, hire an external candidate. Simple, easy. Not necessarily ideal, but it's a hell of a lot easier than the development and the maintaining of some structure for talent development and a talent pipeline.
It's the most direct. It's less ethereal and longer term of a thing. Why I believe heavily in talent pipelines is the idea that once you get one set up, it's scalable, and you've built basically a machine that'll continue running well into the future. But I think a lot of the issues we face, as hiring teams, as recruiters, as executives, it's this focus on the short term, reactive hiring. We have this immediate opening on our team, this hole we need to plug, let's fill it, when it really requires a lot of planning, maybe some initial financial investment to get some of these pipelines up and running. And if you're not able to make the business case for one of these because it's going to take X, Y, and Z number of months or years, you're always going to struggle. That's why I think succession planning also plays in. But yeah, we're coming up on time. I'm sorry if you had a thought, by all means.
No, my only thought was just how much fun this conversation has been. It's been really great to discuss it. I hope it helps those who are able to check us out and listen. Absolutely, and certainly appreciate you being on. Just one last question for you, David. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring? Well, I think that some of the things that I wish people talked about more is some stuff that I've already mentioned, which is the importance of the environment and the leaders in that environment. When you think about it, if I'm a director or I'm a CISO, I'm responsible for creating the environment for the people that are creating the environment, for the people that are creating the environment, for the people that are doing the work. It's absolutely critical and has a massive impact on an organization's ability to operate and perform. I don't know that we talk about that enough. I don't know that we think about culture enough. And how to best create and support teams so that they do their best work, which ultimately results in us retaining people and also hiring great people. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you can have a good team culture despite maybe a not ideal company culture, but it's a lot more difficult. Your team culture is always going to be influenced by the overall organizational culture. And if the tone from the top is positive, it becomes much easier to keep things positive on your team as well. So completely agree. Well, thanks for your time, David. If people want to find you online, what's the best way to do so? You can check me out on LinkedIn. I don't have any particular website, just LinkedIn. Sounds good. Well, thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.